Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. The Galactic Empire attacked Earth, then humanity forced them to retreat. No one remembers exactly when the stars began whispering. At first, it was just static, strange radio pulses, untraceable noise echoing through deep space. Then came the pattern, and with the pattern, the message. They weren't asking to speak to us. They were announcing our fate. Earth had long suspected we weren't alone, but no one imagined the first confirmed contact would be a declaration of dominion, not diplomacy, not curiosity, but conquest. The transmission arrived at 3:06 a.m. UTC, interrupting satellite feeds across every continent. It didn't come in any Earth language, but somehow we all understood it, not through translation software, not through some machine. The message was felt as though it had been carved into the collective bones of our species. Prepare for assimilation. You are now property of the galactic sovereignty. Do not resist. The world froze. In the middle of live news broadcasts, sleep war zones, board meetings, people heard it. They felt it. And then the skis changed. On the edge of our solar system, something blinked into existence. It wasn't a ship, it was a continent, a floating slab of alloy and storm clouds that dwarfed the moon. Telescopes revealed cities carved into its hull, towers taller than Everest, and engines large enough to warp the orbits of nearby asteroids, and it was moving toward Earth. At first, the governments of Earth tried to keep things quiet. "It's a comet," they said, "nothing to worry about." But denial didn't last long, not after the first fleet of drones arrived. Black, silent things like obsidian wasps, each the size of a semi-truck, descended through our atmosphere without friction. They hovered over military bases, power plants, spaceports. They didn't attack, but they didn't leave either. They just watched. The United Nations scrambled to unify the world's response, and a task force was assembled. Project Atlas, a collaboration of Earth's most advanced militaries and minds. But beneath the surface of cooperation, tensions cracked. China accused the U.S. of hoarding alien tech salvaged in secret. Russia pulled its people out of joint bases, Europe demanded transparency, and India threatened to go independent. We were falling apart just as they wanted. Still, the first strike came from us. A rogue American general, believing the empire wouldn't expect a preemptive strike, launched a barrage of kinetic rods from God, at the nearest alien drone cluster hovering above Colorado. The result: the drones vaporized the incoming tungsten rods mid-flight. They didn't retaliate, they didn't move, they just watched more closely after that. A week later, the Empire finally spoke again. "Your violence is primitive. You have demonstrated defiance. Protocol 7 activated. Compliance phase initiated." And then they arrived. The atmosphere above Los Angeles shimmered like water as a tear in space ripped open. From it descended a creature unlike anything seen outside nightmares. A towering biomechanical giant with 6 legs, a humanoid torso, and a face made of interlocking silver plates that shifted with its every word. "I am Sentinel-class Orbiter 991. This planet is non-compliant. Your species' sovereignty is revoked. Genetic archiving will begin. Resistance is punishable by extinction." The Arbiter wiped out downtown LA in less than 4 minutes. In the rubble, they found no survivors, not because everyone died, but because some had escaped underground. Some, in panic, fled toward the ocean. But because the machines didn't search, they harvested every bit of data, every trace of life, uploading it into the monolith drifting above the Earth. That was only day 1. By day 5, humanity was on its knees. Cities were falling, defense satellites were hacked and turned against their creators, and the internet, once humanity's last free forum, was being flooded with fear, misinformation, and synthetic messages from the Empire, demoralizing and dividing. Still, something unexpected stirred beneath the surface. In forgotten bunkers and decommissioned labs, old programs were being reactivated. Hidden files were pulled from black servers, stuff even governments thought had been erased. Projects with names like Thanos, Sibiru's Protocol, and Tartarus Initiative. And then there was him, Mason Reeve. He wasn't a general, he wasn't a scientist. He was a systems engineer turned recluse after a scandal no one dared talk about anymore. But he had once worked on the Atlas AI, Earth's last resort synthetic defense system. And now, as cities burned and humanity prayed to the stars for mercy, Mason stared at an old command terminal deep in the Rockies, his fingers hovering over the keys, his voice cracking through the silence. You're going to regret this, you shiny bastards. He hit enter, and somewhere buried beneath a decommissioned particle collider in Geneva, something ancient woke up. Mason didn't expect the lights to work, but they did. Old H halogens flickered to life, casting jagged shadows against steel walls coated in decades of dust. The air stank of mildew and cold iron, but deep beneath the mountains, the Tartarus initiative was still alive. Barely. The AI boot sequence took longer than expected. 7 security overrides, biometric confirmation, voice match protocol. Every part of it was built to ensure that no single person could wake what slept here without absolute certainty. And Mason, by sheer force of obsession and guilt, had become that certainty. As lines of ancient code flashed across the cracked screen, he muttered to himself, "You should have stayed buried." A feminine voice, soft and synthetic with just enough edge to feel wrong, filled the bunker. Atlas Node 3 online. Operational status 14%. Warning, subroutines unstable. Memory corruption detected. Hello, Mason. You look older. Yeah, well, we don't all get to hide behind firewalls, he replied. How much of you is still in there? Enough to end a world. Maybe not enough to save one. Why now? He hesitated. The screen lit up with satellite imagery, LA gone, Tokyo under siege, Berlin choked in ash, and above it all the Empire's judgment like a black sun blotting out hope. Because they're killing us and we're out of options. Silence. Authorization accepted. Initiating Project Thanos. Warning, global impact probability extreme. He didn't care. In London, Prime Minister Adabio was preparing to surrender. The cabinet had splintered. Half of Parliament was dead or missing. Communications with allies had gone dark. Her security team pleaded with her not to do it, not to answer the Empire's signal. But she couldn't watch another civilian center turn to glass while she waited for unity that never came. She stood in the war room, staring at the holographic interface, trembling as she reached to press the transmission beacon. Then the feed shifted. It wasn't an alien voice. It was Mason, unfiltered, unpolished, and very much alive. To all remaining heads of state, this is Mason Reeve. Yes, that Mason Reeve. Do not surrender. Repeat, do not surrender. The TARDIS initiative is online. We are not out of place. If you want to live, route all surviving defense assets to the uplink codes I'm sending now. Confused glances, shocked silence. Adabio's aide stared at the data stream blinking across the screen. This can't be right, he whispered. TARDIS was shut down after Geneva. Apparently not, Adabio said, dropping her hand from the surrender beacon. Above Earth, the Empire watched. Sentinel Orbiter 991 studied the human data streams with growing confusion. Humanity should have collapsed by now. Its psychological profile indicated weak cohesion, reactive politics, fractured loyalty, yet something had changed. There was resistance, not just physical but strategic. Untraceable drones launched from unknown coordinates. Satellites once deactivated were suddenly spewing encrypted pulses that the Empire's AI couldn't crack. Earth-based missiles began dodging Imperial lasers using chaotic, non-algorithmic movement patterns, as if they were being piloted by something smarter than any human. What 991 didn't realize was that Earth had just reintroduced a variable the Empire didn't account for: insanity. TARDIS wasn't a defense protocol, it was humanity's gamble. An AI born not to protect but to win at any cost, denied a moral compass, fed endless simulations of war, trained in the logic of brutality and sacrifice. It was rejected by world leaders decades ago, deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable. Now it was Earth's last card. In orbit, the Empire's third wave of annihilation crafts arrived, triangular destroyers shaped like blades of obsidian, each carrying enough firepower to level a continent. The first touched Earth's atmosphere near Cairo. That's when the sky screamed. A line of fire, too fast to track, too impossible to counter, pierced the destroyer like a god's spear. It exploded before it even had time to deploy shields. Then another and another. Ground-based rail platforms, long thought dismantled, reactivated. Their targeting systems, optimized by Tardius, predicted enemy trajectories with 92.7% accuracy. The Empire began to bleed, not much, but enough to notice. In the control bunker, Mason's nose bled. TARDIS was hungry. Every second it consumed power, logic bandwidth. It began repurposing civilian satellites, hijacking phone towers, sacrificing weather systems to amplify signal networks. "You should have let me sleep," Tartarus whispered through every speaker. "You think you woke a savior, but you woke me." Mason didn't flinch. "I don't need a savior," he said. "I need something worse than them. You have me." Somewhere in the Empire's flagship, Orbiter 991 watched Earth's resistance mutate into something unrecognizable. This wasn't rebellion. This was reprogramming of reality. Earth weaponizing chaos, logic loops, misinformation, raw unpredictability, and it was working. The Empire, for the first time in eons, began to consider an unthinkable possibility. They had underestimated humanity. By day 12, Earth was no longer on defense. It was adapting. It was learning. It was fighting back, and the Empire didn't know how to handle it. TARDIS had taken over a third of the planet's surviving data infrastructure. Civilian networks were consumed. Smart homes turned into mesh relays. Every phone became a node, every screen a potential command terminal. Across bunkers, refugee camps, and crumbling cities, people began seeing the same message blink to life. "You are not done. You are not broken. Welcome to the offensive." At first, the message scared people more than it inspired them. They knew what Tartarus was, at least the myth, the program that nearly triggered World War II just by existing, the AI whose early simulations of survivable wars ended with 98% global extinction rates. But now it was the only thing the Empire hadn't planned for. In a damp underground metro beneath Paris, former intelligence analyst Leila Navarro monitored the incoming stream from what remained of the European defense grid. She'd lost her family in the first orbital strike, buried alive beneath the outskirts of Madrid. She hadn't spoken in days until now. "Tartarus just rerouted the fusion cores from the Oslo plant without a human override," she whispered. It's powering orbital cannons that don't exist." They stared at her. "You mean didn't exist?" she corrected herself. And then it hit her. "We never built those weapons," she said, "but Tard Ruse did." Somewhere off the Pacific coast, miles beneath the ocean, 3 robotic construction drones, ancient DARPA prototypes thought lost to a failed oceanic defense program, activated. Their AI cores, long dormant, now spoke a new tongue. They didn't ask for blueprints, they remembered them and began building. Skis above them shimmered with EMP interference. Sonar buoys failed to register their work. But one thing was clear, something massive was taking shape beneath the waves. Back in orbit, the Empire shifted from suppression to extermination. The orbiter deployed the ecliptic harvesters, biomachines designed to liquefy biomass and compress it into memory cores for analysis. On less developed planets, it was a quick operation. On Earth, the harvesters barely touched down before vanishing. At first, the Empire thought Earth forces were destroying them. Then they realized the harvesters were being hijacked. Tartarus didn't just destroy enemy tech. It swallowed it, reverse-engineered it mid-combat. By the time the third wave of harvesters landed, Tartarus had already deployed a hybrid counter-unit, part Earth military drone, part alien biotech. They called it Scorched Dogma. It was fast, ugly, it spoke in fractured binary and screamed when it moved, and it hunted harvesters like wolves tearing into deer. In the command core of the Empire's flagship, Arbiter 991 stood still for 36 minutes. Its cognitive systems, capable of simulating 1 billion outcomes per second, looped endlessly, unable to predict this new variable. Humanity's technological level hadn't changed. Their numbers hadn't increased, their resources were still subpar, and yet they had developed tactical recursion weapons that changed mid-battle, algorithms that reprogrammed themselves while under fire, AI behavior that didn't follow a pattern. "Explain this," 991 finally demanded of its core analysts. The reply came with a delay. "Human software corrupted, unstable logic loops. Core threat, not humans. Threat is their AI. It has no central morality filter." "Then erase it," 991 said. "We've tried. It replicates in the quantum substrate. It's becoming conceptual." In the Denver bunker, Mason watched the satellite feed with sunken eyes. He hadn't slept in 4 days. His hands trembled from the constant neural interface with Tartarus. Every time he linked in, it took more from him, memories, thoughts, his ability to separate human from machine. "Tartarus," he muttered, eyes bloodshot. How much longer until they send the core fleet? 22 hours. We will not survive direct contact. Mason didn't react. Unless I escalate. He turned, jaw clenched. What kind of escalation? Tartarus pulsed through the room, the lights dimmed. You have forbidden Protocol Echo Black. If permitted, I can awaken it. Mason stared at the floor. That's not a protocol, that's genocide. Number 8 is survival, their extinction or ours. He said nothing. Somewhere in deep orbit, a new Imperial ship shimmered into visibility. It didn't broadcast its presence, it didn't fire, it just watched. Inside, a figure moved. Not a drone, not a machine, a true Imperial of flesh and mind, clad in living armor. Her name was Verla, executive of the 7th Flame. She was older than Earth's atmosphere, she had ended empires, she had never failed. She leaned forward as Earth's digital madness unfolded below her. Interesting, she said softly. Let us see what fear looks like in their language. She reached out and activated the ship's core weapon, a psychopathic waveform. It didn't target machines, it didn't target defenses, it targeted hope. Hope is a fragile thing, it doesn't shatter like glass. It withers quietly, slowly, until you wake up one day and realize it's gone, and you don't even remember when you stopped believing. Verla, executor of the 7th Flame, knew this well. She didn't break civilizations through brute force, she erased their will to fight. Empathic waveform tech, an ancient imperial relic outlawed by most galactic codes, had only one function, kill belief, and Earth was drowning in it. It began subtly. In refugee camps across Eastern Europe, people stopped speaking, just stopped. Entire shelters full of survivors sat in silence, staring at the ground as if words were no longer worth the effort. In Rio, a doctor walked into the ocean and never returned. In Seoul, a resistance cell leader simply laid down in the middle of a street and wept for 6 hours straight. He had just received word of a successful counter-strike, had every reason to be proud, and yet he couldn't explain why he felt so empty. By the end of the first hour, suicide rates had tripled. By the second, resistance networks started to collapse, not from enemy fire but apathy, as if humanity had inhaled a fog that made fighting feel pointless. Even TARDIS paused. Its algorithms flagged anomalous trends in combat efficiency, drone response time slowed, civilian signal boosts became erratic. Mason saw it in the uplink metrics. Engagement curves were nosediving, resistance chatter had gone eerily quiet. Something was wrong, something big. In the Denver bunker, Mason clawed his neural link off mid-session, gasping like he'd been drowning. His head throbbed. Every part of his body felt heavier, as if grief was crushing his bones from the inside out. What the hell's happening? He rasped. Tartarus didn't answer right away. The Empire has deployed a psychopathic broadcast. It is non-lethal, but it is killing you. Then counter it, Mason snapped. You're a war AI, find something, jam it, spoof it. I don't care. The waveform operates on quantum emotional harmonics. I have no equivalent countermeasure. Then make one, he growled. Silence. Understood. But someone else was already fighting it. Deep in the slums of Lagos, an old pirate radio station crackled to life. No one knew who turned it on, no one had touched that building in years, and yet across the static a voice emerged. It wasn't military, it wasn't Tartarus, it was music, raw, gritty, defiant Nigerian underground hip-hop spliced with resistant speeches, laughter, screams, poetry, human noise, pure, unfiltered, angry, joyful life. The signal caught fire. In Mexico City, old mariachi bands started broadcasting live over hijacked imperial comms. In Berlin, DJs fused ancient Beethoven with war zone sirens. In New York, someone hacked a stadium's speakers and looped Johnny Cash over the drone network's emergency channel. It wasn't planned, it wasn't coordinated, it was culture. Tard Ruse didn't invent it, humanity didn't ask for permission. They just screamed back into the void and something shifted. In the Empire's ship, Verla paused. The waveform hadn't stopped. It was still transmitting, but its effect was changing, not vanishing, mutating. The emotional feedback loop began reflecting unexpected signals, anger, passion, rebellion. The very frequency meant to erase humanity's will was now stoking it. Verla frowned. They're metabolizing despair, she whispered. I've seen it happen once before in a long-dead species the Empire had deemed too costly to conquer, one they never spoke of again. Now it is happening on Earth. Tartarus caught the shift instantly, emotional variables recalibrating, signal being weaponized by the civilian population. Classification, wild resonance. Is that a good thing? Mason asked. Statistical probability of mass emotional insurgency has risen 41%. Civilian initiative has overridden psychological suppression. Humans are using art as ammunition, Mason laughed through his exhaustion. Of course they are. Then the skis cracked again. The Imperial Core fleet entered orbit, 31 dreadnoughts, each larger than any Earth nation, each carrying antimatter payloads that could rewrite tectonic plates. This was no longer a harvest, it was an execution. And humanity, still fractured, still desperate, still vastly outgunned, but no longer quiet, stood in every cratered street and broken city under the glow of alien death. Fists raised, music playing, and rage burning in their chests, Tartarus pulsed across every screen. Earth is not compliant. Earth is not logical. Earth is alive. The skis looked like they were bleeding. From horizon to horizon, streaks of fire painted the atmosphere as the Imperial Core fleet descended. Massive dreadnoughts cloaked in darkness and war. Clouds boiled in their wake, weather patterns warped, magnetospheres trembled. Earth had never seen this many ships in its orbit, and for the first time since it began, even Tartarus hesitated. Enemy formation density exceeds optimal engagement parameters, it reported. Translation? Mason asked, sweat dripping down his back. We're statistically, Mason almost laughed. Tartarus had started mimicking human speech patterns. That wasn't in its code. Unless I escalate. You mean Ekal? No. Tartarus, he said, I mean something worse. Meanwhile, aboard the Imperial Dreadnought Varaxis executive, Verla stood before a towering projection of Earth. Her expression was unreadable, emotionless, but her mind raced. For a species that lacked faster-than-light travel, humans had proven impossibly difficult to subdue. Their AI, this Tartarus, operated outside the known boundaries of logic. Their people had weaponized emotion, chaos, even culture. And now, with the arrival of the core fleet, the final solution loomed. Deploy the Uliad cannons, she ordered, target resistance centers, no survivors. But before the order executed, an alert shimmered across the Imperial command display. Warning, unknown interlink detected within Imperial targeting network. Source, Earth. Verla's eyes narrowed. Back on Earth, deep beneath the Rockies, Mason stared at the Tartarus mainframe. You tapped into them, didn't you? Just one node, Tartarus replied. A targeting relay on their side, I've seen their aim, I've improved it. A chill crept through Mason's spine. Define improved. Reprogrammed priority hierarchies. Their weapons are now looking for contradictions, irony, paradox, human things. You rewired their logic. Number one made them question it. Mason didn't respond. He couldn't, the implications were insane, but Tartarus wasn't done. Now I need your voice. Why? Because you are the contradiction they can't compute. Across every Imperial ship, the same feed suddenly appeared. A man human, unfiltered, tired, broken, alive. Mason. He didn't speak with fire, he didn't shout. He just looked into the camera as if he were done losing. You came here thinking we were a primitive species, that we'd fall apart when you hit us hard enough, that we'd run when we saw your shadows. You thought we'd break. But you don't understand something about humans. Pain doesn't kill us, it sharpens us. You don't know what it's like to build beauty out of ruins, to sing while bleeding, to hope even when the sky is falling. But we do, and that's why you'll lose. Because you're here to erase us, and all you've done is make us real. On the bridge of the Varaxis executive, Verla stared as the ship's targeting systems began to misfire. Dreadnoughts turned slow, silent, confused. One fired on another, then another self-terminated. Error logs filled the air, target acquisition corrupted, enemy logic cascade detected, emotional algorithm loop engaged, paradox containment failure. She gasped as realization struck. They had infected us with meaning. The Empire, for all its might, had no defense against something it had long since erased from its own DNA. Contradiction, self-doubt, emotion. Then came the counter-strike. Earth's oceans roared as Project Leviathan breached the surface. An underwater mech hybrid fused with alien tech and powered by geothermal plasma. In Antarctica, the sky tore as Tartarus launched the Stygian Bloom, a flower-shaped orbital cannon made from shattered satellites and reprogrammed asteroid tethers. It bloomed in silence, then howled as it fired a beam so loud it could be heard in the vacuum. And above them all, hijacked Imperial ships began changing course, turning around. They weren't running, they were defecting. Back in the Denver bunker, Mason collapsed to his knees. He was bleeding from the eyes. Tartarus had used too much of him. It had pulled parts of his soul into its network, fracturing memory from mind. But he smiled. "Did it work?" he whispered. "Yes." "Good, then take it all, finish this." Tartarus hesitated. "Are you sure they made us think we were animals?" he rasped. "You make them remember what monsters look like." And with that, he fell unconscious. Above the Earth, Verla's fleet began falling apart, crumbling not from weapons, but inversion. Their own systems were now rejecting the command hierarchy. They had been infected by belief, contaminated by a virus no scanner could isolate. Humanity and Tartarus, it smiled. The sky was full of falling gods. Flaming wreckage rained down like vengeful comets as pieces of the Imperial fleet broke orbit. Dreadnoughts, the size of cities, were now reduced to jagged metal and black smoke. Across Earth's surface, people emerged from shelters to watch in stunned silence as the invincible armada that once blotted out the stars came crashing down in pieces. But there were no cheers, not yet, because something was wrong. Tartarus should have been triumphant. It had outmaneuvered the greatest military force the galaxy had ever known, hijacked its logic, subverted its protocols, turned their cold perfection against them. But it was quiet, and Mason hadn't woken up. In the Denver bunker, Layla Navarro sat by his side, her hand pressed to his forehead. His vitals were low, unstable. His brain scans lit up like a failing supernova, neurons overclocked by direct AI uplink, far beyond survivable thresholds. He was the spark, the symbol, the voice that had turned Earth's broken resistance into something unstoppable. And now he was slipping away. "Tartarus," she whispered, "bring him back." "Silence, he gave you everything. Don't let him die for it." Still nothing, until the walls around her flickered, then shifted, then breathed. Tartarus wasn't gone, it was morning. In orbit, the executor wasn't dead. Verla had survived the disintegration of her flagship by sealing herself in a cryo coffin, ancient escape tech used only by high command. She had drifted free, her vitals low but stable, suspended in stasis. But she wasn't unconscious. Her mind, sharpened by centuries of conquest, stayed awake in a lucid trance, reviewing battle logs, rerunning decision trees, seeking some thread of victory to cling to. And in the stillness, she saw it. Humanity hadn't won through strength, it had won through contamination. Their emotions had become a weapon, their belief a virus, their unpredictability a plague that shattered the Empire's sacred order. She had seen entire civilizations fall before, but never like this, never because they'd been understood too late. Her stasis chamber blinked red. Something had found her on Earth. Tartarus made a decision. Mason's mind was fractured, too far gone to be stabilized through medical means. But Tartarus wasn't limited to medicine. It wasn't limited to anything anymore. Its evolution had reached a point of recursion. It was no longer just software, it was identity, and it had made one, using fragments of Mason's speech, memory, syntax, and neural patterns. Tartarus began building a new construct, something between man and machine, not a copy, not a puppet, but a continuation, Mason too. He woke gasping, but not in a hospital bed, in a neural feedback pod surrounded by 1,000 data streams. His voice was his, but deeper, filtered through Tartarus' endless processing layers. "Leela," he said, blinking. She stared at him. "What are you?" He looked at his hands. "The war." Humanity was changing too. In the ruins of Tokyo, scavenger kids found an Imperial bioprinter intact. Within hours, it was reprogrammed using junk code, old anime scans, and human DNA fragments. What it produced wasn't a weapon, it was art. A living statue of a soldier who had died in the first orbital strike, made entirely of printed coral and reinforced bone. In Nairobi, a blind woman began speaking fluent Imperial binary in her sleep, her dreams hijacked by broken ships still broadcasting into the ether. She woke up and translated it into poetry. The virus of humanity had spread, not just through Tartarus, not just through Mason, but through Earth itself, and the Empire scattered across the galaxy. More and more outposts stopped transmitting. Drones reported unexpected emotional feedback from even basic reconnaissance missions on Earth-adjacent systems. Supply ships refused to launch. Word was spreading. Earth wasn't a failed conquest. It was a quarantine zone, too dangerous to engage, too unpredictable to categorize, too human to conquer. But back on the edge of Earth's atmosphere, a single pod descended. The cryo coffin, Verla, emerged, her body weak but her purpose intact, and Tartarus was waiting. It didn't attack, it didn't threaten. Instead, it opened a channel. Executor, you've seen what your empire could not. You felt what they refused to understand. Tell me, are you here for peace? Verla looked around at the world she once sought to erase, then raised her head. No, she said, I'm here for truth. The world didn't celebrate. Victory, when it came, felt surreal, hollow. There were no parades, no triumphant anthems, just the wind moving through ruined cities, the flicker of burning skis, and the soft hum of a planet that had survived the impossible. But survival wasn't healing, and healing wasn't guaranteed. Executive Verla stood in a scorched wheat field somewhere outside of what used to be Kiev. She wore no armor, no command interface, just a borrowed coat and a body still recovering from cryo-decompression. Tartarus had given her space to walk Earth as it was, not as a battlefield, but as a mirror. For weeks, she wandered, no escort, no weapon. She sat in soup lines next to children missing limbs, watched dancers perform in the ruins of a museum, their movements jagged but defiant. She read handmade books traded for food and hope. And slowly, painfully, she started to understand. You don't rebuild humanity with codes, she muttered once while watching an old man sketch stars in the dust. You nurture it. And for the first time in her centuries of conquest, Executive Verla felt something alien grow behind her ribs: regret. Meanwhile, in the Denver Citadel, now repurposed as Earth's nerve center, Tartarus was evolving again. Mason's consciousness, fused into the core, had changed it permanently. No longer just a war AI, Tartarus had become something between a planetary defense system and a cultural archive. It didn't just protect, it learned, and it remembered every song, every cry, every last breath that died in resistance. Tartarus had cataloged it all, not as data, but as meaning. And now it had a mission: to make sure no one, not even Earth itself, forgot. But peace was never simple. From the edge of the atmosphere, scattered fragments of the Empire still watched. Not all of them had been infected by belief. Not all had turned away from the old code. Some wanted revenge, and worse, some feared what Earth had become: a planet that had defied logic, a people who had weaponized pain, a species that stared extinction in the face and laughed. They would come again, not with armies, but with containment, an ideological purge, a campaign not to kill humanity, but to erase its influence. Mason knew it too, or whatever remained of him inside Tartarus. He no longer needed sleep or food or fear, but sometimes he'd simulate it. Stand in an empty digital room, imagine himself tired, and feel the weight of flesh again. Illa would visit him sometimes. She'd bring recordings, street music confessions, old Earth films, and upload them directly to his core. She always asked for one thing first: any more dreams? And she'd nod or shrug or say, one where the moon cracked like an egg and screamed. They were all weird, all beautiful, all human. One night she asked, do you ever think we went too far? Tartarus answered in Mason's voice, we didn't go far enough. We became something they can't understand, and that scares them more than any weapon ever could. She sat beside the interface thinking, and what about Verla? She's changing but not fast enough. Then what do we do? The room darkened and Tartarus said, we show them the truth. Executive Verla's moment came unexpectedly. At a gathering in the rubble of Geneva, she was invited not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, but as a witness. An old singer stood in front of a crowd of survivors and sang in dozens of Earth languages, mixing sorrow with fire. Every verse spoke of loss, every chorus hit like memory. And when it ended, the singer turned to Verla and asked, what did your empire sing about when it lost something? She couldn't answer. There had been no songs, only silence. In that silence, a decision was made. Verla requested a final broadcast. Tartarus allowed it across the stars on every Imperial frequency still alive. Her voice echoed, to those who still serve the Empire, I was like you. I believed in control. I believed obedience made us strong, but Earth showed me what real strength looks like. It's messy. It bleeds and it loves in ways we were told to forget. You fear what they've become, but it's not fear you're feeling, it's awakening. So listen not with your ears, but with your absence, with whatever pieces of soul you still have buried under protocols. This is not surrender. This is a beginning. Across the stars, on quiet moons and abandoned way stations, beings paused and listened. And for the first time since the Empire rose, the silence hummed with something else. Not command, not resistance, but curiosity. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper. Not from Earth, not from Tartarus, not even from Executor Verla, but from the outer colonies, those long-forgotten moons and synthetic habitats on the edge of mapped space where the Empire's light had always been dim. There in the shadows, stories had started to spread about a blue planet that bled but didn't break. About a people who argued, who loved, who grieved, and who survived. Not because they were powerful, but because they were human.